Hey everybody, welcome to Cast and Court TV. This is your girl, Miss Public Info, here with the latest and greatest and sometimes hated updates of the most high-profile cases going on around the country. Today we're going to talk about Sean Combs, Sean Combs, Sean Combs. What about that Sean Combs sentencing? Now, the sentencing for Sean Combs took place yesterday. It was a nearly 7-hour sentencing hearing. The sentencing hearing, Cast and Court TV already did the update. If you guys want to hear all of the ins and outs of what happened during the sentencing, you can go ahead and look at the last episode, episode 109, and take a look at that. You can also look at the 7-hour live that Cast and Court TV conducted throughout, where we kept up with every single update that was going on in real time in the courtroom. As you know, the case was not televised, so we depended on our guy over at Inner City Press, who was the only journalist allowed to actually live tweet from the courtroom to really give us the play-by-play. And so that's what we covered here at Cast and Court TV yesterday for a record 7 hours, our longest live of the show's inception. So I'm sure there'll be more as more cases come to our attention. Okay, so now what? Well, now what is Sean Combs's legal team did exactly what Cast and Court TV predicted they would do, which was they appealed the 4-year incarceration sentence immediately. Now, the filing has not, taken place just yet, but right after the sentencing hearing, Sean Combs's legal team went and had a live press conference, a live gaggle in front of the Southern District of New York and Lower Manhattan's courthouse, where they talked about that this was unconstitutional actual ruling, that the 4-year sentence of incarceration for these two convictions was unconstitutional. That is what Brian Steele said. They also said that, Judge Arun Subramanian acted as a 13th juror, that the jury in this case acquitted Sean Combs, that they would be filing an appeal ASAP because it was wrong, because he was acquitted. Now, let's talk about this in reality, because Sean Combs's attorneys are missing it. Now, before I get into this, I want to say a couple of things. Number one, please do not forget to subscribe and like to the Cast and Court TV channel. Please don't forget to do that. Please engage with us. We love that. Also, we are now a monetized channel. If you would like to support the Cast and TV show, please do so if you feel so inclined. All of the proceeds that you donate belong to the viewers, because we utilize those proceeds to actually fund any sort of court documents that we need to get for this case or any other cases that the Cast and Court TV show is reporting on at the time, or sort of, investigating, because we do more than just report. I want to say that as well. This is not really a reporting show. This is really a show that encompasses legal understanding, the understanding of the legal process, the understanding of the legal jargon, and all of that. So this is just not a reporting show. I just want to make that clear, because I do give personal commentation about what has gone on in the courtroom process. So this is just not me giving you the news as a news reporter, because some people have complained that I'm not unbiased, and that is true. I am not unbiased on some of the cases, and the Sean Combs case, I am not unbiased. I am absolutely biased about this case. I've talked to you guys about my background. I am not an attorney. I'm not a lawyer, but I am a former public information officer of one of the largest district attorney's office in the state of Colorado, in the metropolitan area, and I was there for many years. I've worked in law enforcement. I've worked for attorneys, with attorneys. I write like an attorney, and at times I speak like an attorney. But in this particular show, I try not to speak like an attorney, because I want to make sure you guys understand what I'm saying. But there are times that I use legal jargon to explain what is going on in the courtroom process. That said, I am not unbiased. So if you are looking for rather a channel that is going to give you pro Diddy news or a pro Diddy explanation, this is not the channel for you. Perhaps come back to me on a different story where we're talking about something else that you are interested in. But if you're looking for a pro Diddy channel, this is not a pro Diddy channel. So I'm just letting you know that off the rip. So those of you who don't agree and don't like what I'm doing, you don't have to listen. But for those of you who want to stay and want to hear what I'm saying about this particular case in terms of what the legal viewpoint is on the appeal as it relates to the Department of Justice and as it relates to the judge's ruling, and you want to know what the judge's ruling means, what the appeal process looks like, what the appeals process actually means as it relates to what the defense is seeking, please stay. That said, and that out of the way, let us roll on. Now, in the defense's viewpoint, they feel that Mr. Combs has been railroaded. They feel that Mr. Combs has been railroaded because they feel that the hearing or the sentencing is unfair to him. They have said this. They said this during the trial court phase. This is not the first time we've heard this. We heard this during their failed attempts to receive bail for Mr. Combs, which they attempted to do many times. This is Mr. Combs here. Obviously, the hearing was not televised, but this is a artist rendering of the Mr. Combs when he was actually being sentenced. By Judge Arun Subramanian, as you can see him there, sort of in the offset in the distance there, on his there seated where he is giving his sentence to Mr. Combs of 4 years. And Judge Subramanian said a lot of things. He talked about how a sentence of incarceration was necessary to actually establish deterrent to deter Mr. Combs from doing anything like this. Again, he said he actually couldn't, lawfully send Mr. Combs out into the world with time served at that 14 months because he wasn't sure that Mr. Combs would not commit these acts again. This is echoing much of what Judge Subramanian said during the trial court phase when Mr. Combs was looking for bail, those 5 attempts of bail that he tried to receive. Judge Subramanian said some of the same thing when he rendered a denial of the bail during that time. And Mr. Combs had a bevy of people sort of speaking on his behalf. 5 of his attorneys spoke on his behalf, and he also spoke on his own behalf. But none of those things were able to convince Judge Subramanian to allow him to be released on time served. The Judge Subramanian felt that it was necessary. Now, I want to talk about what the defense team, Combs's defense team, is saying is essentially this was unconstitutional or that this was double jeopardy, essentially. So let's talk about that. Now, one of the things that they essentially get wrong from the rip is that this sentence is unconstitutional. The sentence is not unconstitutional. Now, I explained this in other episodes that I've done, but I'm going to explain it again as it relates to the Mann Act. Now, the Mann Act allows for the consideration of several aggravators. Okay. So I am going to, I should have had this up before, but that's okay. But I'm going to have it up now. But there are several Mann Act aggravators. Let's talk about what those aggravators are. One of the aggravators for the Mann Act, and what is an aggravator? Because that could be like your base question. An aggravator or a sentence enhancer, those are they're the same term essentially, are acts that a conviction will allow an offense to actually raise the severity of the sentence for a convicted offense. So essentially, this particular conviction, the Mann Act, doesn't have aggravators in the typical sense, okay? Rather, there are aggravated circumstances or factors as it relates to the Mann Act that can increase the severity of the Mann Act sentences or the Mann Act offense itself that are related to the transportation of for prostitution. And this can include the use of force, violence, or coercion. And the judge explained at the top of the sentencing why he was considering coercion as an aggravator in this particular conviction. He namely talked about the trip from Cannes that Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura took to New York, and that on that trip, Mr. Combs demanded a freak off, which would include the hiring of a SEX worker, to which Miss Ventura said she did not want to freak off. Mr. Combs responded to her, and we saw these receipts during the trial court phase, and he said, well, if you don't, I'm going to be showing this video to your parents, to this one, to that one, to whomever. And so this was sort of like the typical gold merry-go-round that would occur with Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura if she said she didn't want to freak off or she wanted to stop doing that or whatnot. And so the judge pointed this out during the sentencing and was very clear that he was considering coercion, which is what that was, what I just explained, as it related to the Mann Act. And please be clear, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Combs was acquitted of SEX trafficking and the RICO. The RICO and the SEX trafficking also had coercion as aggravators. So this particular aggravator that we're talking about now is not related to the acquitted offenses. It is related to the conviction, the convicted offense, which is the Mann Act. So over time, obviously, the Mann Act had been amended to criminalize broader range of SEXual activity, which includes facilitation of SEX or the transportation of SEX. Okay? Now, another aggravator that does not include Mr. Combs, for an example, is the involvement of minors as it relates to the Mann Act. That is also an aggravator, but that is not one that the judge considered with the Mann Act conviction for Mr. Combs because, of course, everyone involved was over the age of 18. But the aggravator here that he did utilize as his reasoning for the sentencing, according to the federal guidelines that say that he can consider both coercion and force. Force is violence. Force is Mr. Combs's propensity for violence, the cuts on Miss Ventura's eye, the snatching out of Miss Ventura's hair, the punching Miss Ventura, the stomping Miss Ventura, all of that. The video that we saw from the Continental Hotel, that is force as it relates to the Mann Act. So the judge was allowed to consider those two aggravators as the reference to the conviction. And that is what essentially caused the conviction to include a period of incarceration as it relates to the sentence. The Mann Act was initially intended to prevent prostitution. Its language was broad. The severity of the actual act of transportation or facilitation thereof for prostitution can increase if the person being transported into prostitution was also subject to force, fraud, or coercion, which would also fall under SEX trafficking. But that is not included in this because he was acquitted of the SEX trafficking. but he was not acquitted of the Mann Act. And the Mann Act allows for the judge to consider coercion or force as an aggravator. This is according to the federal guidelines, the federal sentencing guidelines. And that is the problem with Sean Combs' team's claim of their appeal based upon double jeopardy or a violation of due process. There is no violation here. The judge could have been a lot more strict with the Mann Act. He could have been. But he said it wasn't appropriate. He said that the conviction, it was not appropriate to be any more stricter than he was. The judge said that the DOJ's recommendation of 135 months was not appropriate, is what he said. He said that wasn't appropriate, that it was over the amount of time that would be necessary, is what he said. On the other end of the spectrum, as it relates to Mr. Combs's request for time served for the 14 months that he's been incarcerated at the MDC, he said that was not an sufficient amount of time. It wasn't sufficient enough because he could not guarantee that Mr. Combs would not commit these acts again based upon Mr. Combs's reluctance, even in the sentencing phase of this, to be repentant. His team was still doubting the victims. No one believed her, Mr. Steele said or Mr. Agnifilio and the defense team, all of them, said in a 61-page opposition to the DOJ's request for 135-month, sentence. No one would believe Mia, who wanted to speak. No one believed her. And she's considered a victim witness in the case. She testified on behalf of the DOJ, on behalf of the prosecution. Then at sentencing, Mr. Brian Steele says, well, he sometimes hit his beloved girlfriends, and went on, as he was referred to Cassie, is who he's referring to, and then went on to say that, that whatever went on between Cassie and Mr. Combs was consensual. It was not consensual. Cassie was very clear that there were a lot of times in which she did not want this, that she did not want, for instance, the hired escorts urinating in her mouth to the point in which she would choke. She did not want that. She was very clear about that. And so the judge is sort of looking at all of this full scope, as well as what's being said in the sentencing hearing. And he says, well, Mr. Combs is still not accepting accountability for this. It's one thing to say you're sorry, but then in the next breath, you say, but it wasn't me and I didn't do it. I didn't do it. It was consensual. She wanted it. That's what you're saying. So the judge, based upon Mr. Combs, based upon his attorneys at sentencing and throughout the course of the case, because this is a judge who is looking at this full scope. He's looking at this 360 degrees. He's been on this case since the inception. He's saying, well, you guys are not accepting accountability here, and that's part of it. And so I don't think that if Mr. Combs were allowed to be given time served, that Mr. Combs would really understand the severity of all of this. And verbatim, Judge Submaranian said, so based on that, a sentence of incarceration is needed as a deterrent to this behavior. And so he went on to proceed to sentence Mr. Combs to 4.1 years, which is about 4 years and 2 months in the Department of Corrections, also known as 50 months, which is a far cry less than the, what was it, 70 to 87 months, 7.5, the top would be 7.5 years that the Department of Probation actually recommended, per the guidelines, I might add, and a far cry less than the 135 months, 11.5 years that the Department of Justice requested per the federal guidelines. Judge Submaranian went way below and went to 50 months, 4.1 years, for which Sean Combs has already served 25% of that sentence because he's already done 14 months. And so essentially he's only has around 3 years to go. And federally, they've got to do 85% of the sentence. So presumably, if it's good behavior, he could get out a tad before that. And yet it still is not suffice with or for his attorneys. Now, during the course of the sentencing, I was confused. If you go back and look at that live, those of you who joined us for the 7 hour live, first of all, thank you so much for rocking with us for 7 hours. There's a lot of y'all who are with us, and I appreciate it. But I was confused during the sentencing because there were many times, not because of my lack of knowledge, but because of the way of which the defense was sort of table setting their entire uh argument. Well, I knew that they didn't want him to get any time of incarceration. I knew that. But what I didn't understand why they were speaking as though incarceration wasn't even on the table. It was kind of like the way they were talking was like, well, incarceration is nonsensical, but it is not. According to the federal guidelines, incarceration is absolutely possible with this particular level of offense. Now, Sean Combs is a category one defendant at the time in which he was convicted of these 2 counts of the Mann Act because he's never been in trouble prior to this moment legally. Trouble meaning convicted. He wasn't a convicting felon. We know Sean Combs has had very many run-ins with the law, actually, but this is the first time he's actually been convicted. So prior to this, he had no prior felony convictions on his record. So that makes him a level one, category one offender. The actual Mann Act conviction is a level 27 offense. Okay. Now that's just the Mann Act by itself. You got busted for, transpoing folks for the reasons for prostitution or facilitation thereof. Okay, fine. But according to the federal guidelines, when you add on these other aggravators, that substantially raises the profile or the severity of the potential sentence. And so, what I could not understand about the defense team was that they kept sort of talking around it or talking like it wasn't a possibility or that it was out of the question, that this is not something that is even, being considered or should be on the table. And they did so without even having Mr. Combs fully um, administer accountability for the conviction. Well, why wouldn't there be an aggravator, especially if your client is not willing to take full accountability for what went on? Mr. Combs, from the beginning and through the end, contended virtual innocence, even for the convicted counts. Now let's get into Tenny Caragos, who did an interview with ABC yesterday following the sentence, who essentially said, well, the judge kept bringing up these factors that he was acquitted of. He was acquitted of the SEX trafficking. It was not guilty. It was not guilty. It was not guilty on the RICO and the SEX trafficking, but it was not guilty. It was guilty on the Mann Act. And as the federal guidelines have has told us, and as I've explained to you all, the judge has every legal backing to consider coercion and force as two aggravators related to the conviction of the Mann Act. He can do it. And so he did. He thought it was necessary. So Tenny Garrigo says, well, the judge is ignoring the jury's verdict. Well, so are you. You're also ignoring the jury's verdict of a guilty on the Mann Act because now here you are wanting to appeal the sentencing, but also you try to appeal the conviction, defense team, on a Rule 29 or Rule 33 ahead of the sentencing. You tried to appeal the Mann Act convictions by requesting an acquittal and or a new trial. So save us the I respect the jury so much act when you don't. You don't respect the jury. You don't respect the jury's decision. You essentially have said from the beginning that the jury was wrong, that the jury should have completely acquitted your client of every single count. But they did not, based on the evidence, the preponderance of the evidence without a reasonable doubt. So if the jury is to be respected and to be believed as it relates to the acquittals of the RICO and the SEX trafficking counts, should they not also be respected and be believed for the convictions of the two Mann Act counts? Make it make sense. Miss Garagos, Mr. Steele, Mr. Agnifilio, Miss Shapiro, Mr. Douglas, or Donaldson, Mr. Driscoll, Miss Westmoreland, who put on quite an act, I might add, during the sentencing hearing. Miss Westmoreland. I'm actually wondering, does Miss Westmoreland and Sean Diddy Combs have some sort of extra relationship going on? She's sitting here crying during the sentencing hearing as though Sean Combs is a lover of sorts. She's weeping openly. You know how unprofessional that is for a defense attorney during a federal sentencing, to the point where you have to excuse yourself in terms of I'm sorry because you're weeping? Or was this more of the dinner theater floor show that we got from the closing arguments during the trial court phase? I think so. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with that. And now here we are. We have a sentencing. There's a sentence of incarceration. And Combs's defense team is still at it. They're still at it with the antics. You want your client to get away scot-free, is essentially what you're telling us, that he should not be held responsible for any of the horrid behavior that we heard during the trial court phase. Tenny Garagos goes on and says, well, he wasn't charged with domestic violence, so therefore this is inappropriate. No, he wasn't charged with domestic violence. You're right. But he was charged and convicted of the two Mann Act counts. And in the federal guidelines of the two Mann Act counts, it says that a judge may consider force, violence, domestic or otherwise, as an aggravator of the Mann Act conviction. So Ms. Garagos and the crew If you think that you are going to appeal this sentencing, which apparently you do and you are, and that the Second Circuit Court, which is the appellate court there in the Southern District of New York and the Lower Manhattan, is going to somehow Houdini your client's way out of this, it's not going to happen. This is actually the lowest sentence he could have expected, truthfully, um, with the aggravating factors attached to the convictions. There are a lot of people out there. I talked to you guys, some of you, on the day of the sentencing, just minutes after the sentencing took place. Many of you, were upset about the fact that you felt like the sentence wasn't high enough, that he got off. I mean, I will absolutely tell you all, this sentence was definitely a favor for Mr. Combs. I think, I expected, based on the guidelines, I did not expect the 11 years. I agree with Judge Submaranian that the 11 years would have been excessive. Okay. But I did expect 5 to 8, somewhere living in that neighborhood. So he went one below my lowest expectation, which would have been the 5. Um, Listen, Judge Submaranian was very fair about this sentencing. This accusation that he was the 13th juror is just ridiculous, because Judge Submaranian went by the book on this. There's no appellate court that was going to say that Judge Submaranian violated Mr. Combs in any way, or did not follow due process, or did not follow the protocols as it relates to the federal guidelines, uh and was in some way committing double jeopardy. It absolutely was not, for the reasons I've already explained. Now, you all may not like it, meaning some people out there may be people, Mr. Combs namely. Mr. Combs may not like it. He may not like it, but this is the outcome of this particular offense, with the two aggravators legally paired to it. That's the law. That's the law. It is what it is. The problem here is that Mr. Combs has never been made to be a responsible or accountable for his actions. This is essentially the first time that Mr. Combs is actually, that a judge or anyone has essentially made Mr. Combs own up to or face any real consequences for his actions. And that is really what is happening here today, or now, as it relates to the his defense team being upset about his sentencing. Cassie Ventura said something very interesting during her letter to the judge. She said, I know that who he was to me, the manipulator, the aggressor, the abuser, the trafficker. She called him a trafficker, even in this phase of the sentencing. Though he was acquitted, she still feels that he was that, is who he is as a human. He has no interest in changing or becoming better. He will always be the same cruel, power hungry, manipulative man that he is. And the reason I thought that was interesting to read in this is because Mr. Combs never, in his time in which he, was talking to the judge about, the things that the reasons rather why he should just be allowed to go home, essentially. He never addressed how he was going to maintain his sobriety. His legal team bragged that he'd been sober this entire time. Well, he's in jail, so there's going to be a level of sobriety, because he's no way to get a hold of the kinds of drugs he's addicted to. There's drugs in jail, which his legal team actually even talked about, that there were drugs in jail and in his particular pod of 25 men. So he blew the whistle on those guys. They can expect a a raid pretty soon, but that there's drugs in jail, drugs in his pod, they said. Uh, but that he wasn't partaking, probably because he does designer drugs, Molly and what is it, cocaine and 2C and what is it, ketamine and methamphetamine, and he does all these different. They probably don't can't get a hold of that. I don't know. And so even with Mr. Combs claiming sobriety throughout the time in which he's been incarcerated for the last 14 months, there's no point in which Mr. Combs actually expresses to Judge Submaranian how he would go about maintaining said sobriety if he were released back to his family. Instead, what we got was a character, a vast array of characters for what seemed like the cast of The Simpsons show, who sort of came along and talked about how, a pastor, oh, if he's released in my care, I'll make sure he's rehabilitated. Another former incarcerated individual who's a nonprofit director now, uh, who said that he, would be conducting speaking engagements just the week after he would be released, which Mr. Combs had no idea if he was going to be released or not. Which, of course, his legal team wasn't messaging correctly the possibility that Mr. Combs would not be released, because Mr. Combs was setting up speaking engagements for himself without even knowing what the sentence would be. This sort of actually is what I'm talking about as it relates to Cassie's comment that he will always be this power hungry person. He will always be this individual, because her comment is right. And actually, Judge Submaranian also echoed her comment in his sentencing to Mr. Combs. Because Mr. Combs is sitting here, setting up speaking engagements. He's got all of this full court press. He probably had the jet gassed up and everything. Didn't even know what this man, this judge, was going to sentence him. But he presumed, based upon a ridiculous amount of hubris, self-assuredness, and entitlement, that he would be getting out and going home and that it would be time served. So this plays into his own sort of self-absorbed thinking that he would be out of here, because that's been sort of the highlight of his life, particularly since he's been in this self-named billionaire status, which he is no more, and particularly since he's been in the framework of calling his own shots, which of course he's not in that position anymore. And so this is part of Judge Submaranian's reluctance to make the decision to allow Mr. Combs to go home. The sort of, audacity that he would just assume that it was going to happen without thinking about the consequences that come with the actions in which he made. And then foregoing his team saying, well, it was consensual. It wasn't consensual, Jane Doe, either. There were conditions which are considered to be coercive conditions, according to the Mann Act aggravators, that were attached to his relationships with each woman and the violations of the Mann Act that were attached. If you do this, or if you don't do this, I will do this. We already heard about the cantrip, and that was the sort of the tone of his relationship with Miss Ventura, including a record career and all, a music career and all of that he was dangling in front of her. As related to Jane Doe, it's like, well, if you don't do this, I won't be maintaining your livelihood. Mr. Combs, in the 4-page letter, actually relates to that notation, because he says, well, I thought I was just taking care of Daphne Joy. I was taking care of Jane Doe. and her family. How could you think that? Oh, but I didn't know it was hurting her. Don't try the babe in the woods routine now. How could you think that when you were telling the woman that if she didn't do what you wanted, having sex with all these random people who you were paying money, the Mann Act convictions, essentially, that you were going to stop funding her lifestyle, regardless of what anybody thinks about it, that she should have gotten a job and she should have taken care of herself. This is what Mr. Combs utilized as coercion. It was coercive. Well, if you don't do this, I'm not going to do that. Fraud, coercion. He had no intention on making either woman a real girlfriend. Though his legal team referred to Cassandra Ventura as the woman he loved. And Cassandra Ventura actually talked about that in that statement that she made to Judge Marunian about the fact that, you know, he claimed that, you know, he loved her, but he didn't. He was a manipulator, a master manipulator. Judge Marunian in the Moranian, excuse me, and the Submarinian in the last sort of few sentences of his ruling essentially said essentially said that Mr. Combs could not be trusted. He could not be trusted, essentially. Get out of here. Sorry, guys. The dog. That he essentially could not be trusted. That's what he said. Just like my dog can't be trusted to be quiet during the times in which I'm doing my show. Apologies for that. And then the DOJ also, they also said during their few sentences, I mean, the DOJ didn't really talk that much during the sentencing, but they also said that Sean Combs was a master manipulator. He was a master puppeteer is what they called him. A master puppeteer. So in short, as it relates to this particular sentencing hearing, the Sean Combs' defense team has very little to stand on as it relates to um, an appeal. Very little to stand on. They will bring up this 13th juror situation. They'll bring up the double jeopardy, supposed double jeopardy, which was not. They'll bring up a violation of due process, which there was none. Um, and they will probably bring up the fact that, Judge Submarinian tried to make an example out of Sean Combs because that is something that Sean Combs actually mentioned in his 4-page letter and in his sentencing, which in his speech to the judge there in the courtroom, which was a mistake. It was a mistake. You should not. This man has your future in your hands, and yet you still cannot fall on your sword. It just he's narcissistic. He could not fall on his sword, even for his good. And so he mentions to the judge, "Oh, they want you. They want you to make an example out of me," as though the judge has no legal volition of his own. The man is an intelligent judge, a federal judge. He has his own legal volition. He knows the guidelines. He knows the rules. He's only been sentencing for I don't know how long. He is a guy that knows his job, just like you know your job in the studio. What would someone look like coming to you saying, "Oh, well, I know they want you to do this, but you should do that"? You'd have him can. Don't tell me what I should be doing in my studio. Same with the judge. Sean Combs tried to, undercut the judge, even in his speech to the judge, and try to tell the judge, "I know you're going to try and make an example out of me, but don't do that by saying, well, they want you to make an example out of me." Don't tell the judge that. The judge is an intelligent man and he cannot be manipulated, and he was not. So Sean Combs essentially shot his own self in the foot. His attorneys also said shot him in the foot as well, because Sean Combs had already said in his note, the 4-page note to Judge Submaranian, that he was accepting responsibility and that he was sorry. But then his idiot of an attorney, Brian Steele, comes along and says, but it was consensual. He didn't do anything wrong. And then on a flip side, continue to say that Sean Combs took responsibility. Well, what is he actually taking responsibility for, Brian Steele? If you said that the situation between Cassie Ventura and Miss Daphne Joy was consensual, when we know it wasn't, we know it wasn't based upon the conviction. It wasn't the Mann Act conviction. We know that, and the aggravating circumstances that are attached to the conviction. We know that it wasn't consensual. So, what exactly is Mr. Combs actually taking responsibility for? He's not taking responsibility to the force or coercion that's attached to the convictions that increase the severity and increase the sentence length. So, what was all of that about? So, essentially, Brian Steele torpedoed his own client's letter to the judge. And then Sean Combs comes behind Brian Steele and tries to manipulate the judge even further with language about, oh, they want you to make an example out of me. It's exactly what Cassie Ventura said. She said he is manipulative. He will always be the same cruel, power hungry, manipulative man that he is today. He has no interest in changing or becoming better. She's right, based upon what I just said, and based upon the fact that he never told us, gave us a roadmap, gave us a plan as to how he would become better. Just that he would become better, but never gave us any sort of thought process, blueprint as to what the steps he was going to take to do so. All he could tell us about is a free game class that he gave in the MCD or the MDC, that essentially was more of a situation of ego feeding for him, where he could be a role model and a mentor and receive adoration. But there was no roadmap or a blueprint or of a plan that Mr. Combs gave to the court that he would actually administer to become better. He just said that he would become better and that he's changed. How have you changed? What steps did you take to change? He also didn't tell us that. How is the judge supposed to believe you? And to Judge Submarinian's own admission, Mr. Combs, if we let you out today, he'd be back to doing the same thing. Back to doing the same thing. Back to doing the same thing. Now, 3 hours ago, there is actually was actually a new lawsuit that was filed against Mr. Combs. And I'm going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it here. Now, there is a man who filed a civil suit against Mr. Combs. Obviously, Sean Combs is facing what 80 plus lawsuits against him at this point. But now there is a man who says he was one of Sean Diddy Combs's former interns, and he claims that he contracted the human immune deficiency virus, otherwise known as HIV, after being drugged and sexually assaulted at an after party hosted by Mr. Combs. And it's all laid out in a new lawsuit. Now, the man is suing Mr. Combs under a pseudonym. It was filed here in Los Angeles Superior Court just yesterday, the same day as the sentencing. He says that he was pursuing an entertainment career in late 2014. He says that he went on to intern in the music industry back in the day. And when an opportunity to work with Sean Combs came around, he jumped on the opportunity. He said that one night he was driven to a house in Valverde, which is a suburb here of Los Angeles, here in Los Angeles, for a music shoot for Sean Combs. And that following the shoot was an after party that was hosted by Sean Combs, who he says, spoke with him several times. So, sort of, making himself known to him several times. He says that there was an abundance of cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol at the party. He says that he stuck with the alcohol, that he didn't consume any of the cocaine or the marijuana, though he was offered. But he says after consuming about 2 or 3 drinks, that he began to feel a little off. Now, if this sounds familiar, this does sound familiar because this is sort of the same sort of course of events that we heard about going on with one of the later escorts as it relates to the latter period of Combs's relationship with Cassie Ventura. And some of the escorts said that they had passed out during the act or during the time in which they were there, and that they had felt off, and it was after they had consumed alcohol. He says he began to feel off, but he thought it was the wooziness from not eating a lot of food that day. So he sort of brushed it off. But he claims he was led after that during this time in which he was feeling woozy. He said he was then led into a room as he started to black out. And then he says his next memory was of being anally sodomized by an unknown person before he passed out. Full stop. We're going to stop there because in some of these civil lawsuits, and I'm not talking about the frivolous ones, guys, I'm talking about the others. And some of these lawsuits, civil lawsuits against Sean Combs, the men who were attacked in this way say that they would go in and out of consciousness and awoke to Sean Combs. They named him. This guy isn't naming him. He said it was an unknown person, but they said they awoke to Sean Combs sodomizing them. There's a security guard in particular that had this experience. This lawsuit is still pending. This is not one of the frivolous ones that was thrown out by the judge. And so this actually sort of parrots or is parallel to those accounts. But to be clear, the John Doe in this case doesn't claim that it was Diddy who allegedly sodomized him. He goes on to say in the lawsuit that after he regained his senses, he says he noticed blood coming from his bottom, his rectum, and that he later went to a clinic, meaning in close proximity to this incident, that he later went to a clinic to get tested for STDs, but the results came back negative. That it was negative for HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases. He goes on and he says, but then he was retested months later. And then he learned that he was infected with HIV and that it did not show up on the initial test. And if those of you who are educated on this, such as myself, educated on the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV/AIDS, then you know that you can get tested for HIV with today's technology a little too soon. Like it takes at least 12 weeks, which is tantamount to about 3 months, for a reactive HIV result to appear if it's going to. Okay. So it's very possible that this John Doe could have tested, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks after the incident occurred and still been negative, and then retested some 2 months later, 3 months later, which would have been 3 months from the actual incident, and then tested positive for the disease, which would pinpoint this time frame being the source of infection. That's what he's saying. As a result of his positive HIV status, John Doe claims he has suffered severe emotional and psychological distress, and he is now suing for sexual assault, sexual battery, and more, and he is seeking unspecified damages. Now, Diddy's legal team has responded to these particular allegations. Normally they don't. So many, civil lawsuits flying around. They really don't, but this one they did. And they said, as we've said before, Mr. Combs cannot respond to every new publicity stunt, even in response to claims that are facially ridiculous or demonstrably false. Mr. Combs and his legal team have full confidence in the facts and the integrity of the judicial process. And court, the truth will prevail that Mr. Combs never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone, man or woman, adult or minor. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, Casting Court TV, how does this make Sean Combs responsible? How is this guy suing Sean Combs if he doesn't even know if he did it or not or whatnot? Sean Combs can still be civilly responsible as the facilitator of the event, meaning supplying the drugs, supplying the environment, fostering an environment where this sorts of going ons would be happening, being responsible because he is the one that supplied the actual place and where this occurred. And this young man was drugged there at this particular event. That Mr. Combs supplied the environment. This is actually very similar, and I'm talking about the sort of reasons, the negligence, because that's what this lawsuit would essentially be. It would be negligence because he's not saying that he did it, but he supplied the environment so that Sean Combs would be negligent in this particular thing because he provided or fostered an environment where these sorts of things could happen. This is very similar to the lawsuit that Combs and Christian Combs both have against them, from the young lady who was staffed on that boat, where Sean Combs had some sort of family yacht vacation, and the woman says that Sean Combs is responsible for or negligent for fostering an environment where these things could occur, because before the boat ride, Mr. Combs was much like, oh, this is a family activity, blah, blah, blah. But then once they got on the water, she said it was a very different situation. And then he was saying it was anything goes sort of thing, and that it was very hedonistic and it was not family oriented at all. And then that's when his son came along and propositioned her and tried to force her into some fellatio activities, etc., etc. So this incident with John Doe, as it relates to the negligence portion of it, is the part that is similar to that lawsuit on the boat, because both of these people are indirectly holding Sean Combs responsible for negligence and fostering an environment where these sorts of things could occur. So that's where we are now. Is it going to be difficult for John Doe to prove this? Possibly. I mean, listen, the statute of limitation for here in the state of California for this sort of thing for I think a transmission of um HIV is somewhere in the, I don't really know the range. I have to look actually. Let's look. Let me look really quickly and see what the statute of limitation is. He says this happened in 2004. I mean, I'm sorry, 2014. So there is no specific statute of limitations for HIV transmission here in the state of California. There used to be, but there isn't anymore. There was a California specific criminal HIV transmission laws were repealed and replaced in 2018 by a Senate Bill 239, because it was happening so often, making intentional HIV transmission a misdemeanor and not a felony for adults. I see. So now it is a misdemeanor, not a felony. There is no specific statute of limitations for HIV transmission under this reformed law. But I want to know about what it would be civilly. That's a criminal thing. I don't want to know about it criminally. I want to know civilly. That's how it is criminally. So for those of you that are interested in that. Um It says in California, the statute of limitations for a civil claim related to HIV transmission is generally 2 years from the date of the injury, the transmission, that is, was discovered or reasonably should have been discovered, and that this deadline applies to personal injury lawsuits such as claims of negligence, which is the claim here, or battery, which is the claim here, which could be used to seek compensation for harm suffered due to an unlawful HIV transmission. It says that the 2 year clock typically starts when you discover the injury or discover transmission in this case, or when you reasonably could have found out about it. Um, so so essentially, it's 2 years. So I'm very interested to see how this is going to turn out, because according to the California state statute, civil statute, as it relates to the transmission, the negligence, which is what he would be suing Sean Combs over, that the negligence would be a 2 year earmarker. But when we look at the lawsuit itself, and I want to go back to the lawsuit quickly, it says that Mr. Doe is actually suing for psychological distress and severe emotional distress. He's suing for sexual assault, sexual battery, and more. So the more must be the negligence, because he doesn't really know who actually did this to him. And the only legal way he will be able to actually sue Sean Combs would be through negligence, as an act, through being the party thrower, that it was his party, that it was his property or place in which they had it, that he was the one to be responsible for what went on at that party. That is actually something that could happen to anybody. Actually, if you have a party at your home and someone is drugged at your home, and they actually become, something happens to them, they become injured in some way, they could hold you civilly responsible for negligence, because it happened at a party in which you had on your property, or you had in your home, or that you threw, that you took ownership of, and they could sue you civilly for negligent responsibility. So that's what the basis of his lawsuit is. This is the first time that we are hearing of a civil suit that is accusing Sean Combs of any way, shape, or form, negligence or otherwise, being responsible for the transmission of HIV. We will not pretend here at Cast and Court TV that we have not heard through the grapevine, through the internet's grapevine, but nothing in the court process, that we have not heard that Sean Combs allegedly, has HIV himself. This is something that has been put on the internet blotter. We're not saying that Sean Combs has HIV. We do not know his health status here at Cast and Court TV. We do not claim that Sean Combs did this. We do not claim that Sean Combs is responsible for this. This is what the lawsuit is alleging happened. We also are not claiming that Sean Combs himself has this disease or anything like that, but it is a part of the internet and various different gossip sites, blogs, and things of that nature who have claimed that Sean Combs has, has this disease, but there's no way of anyone knowing that. But I just wanted to say that that the rumor and the gossip is out there about it because this lawsuit that this kid has out here, I shouldn't say kid, I don't know, this man, John Doe, I don't know how old the guy is. That this guy has out there. I only said kid because he says he was interning, so I always assume kid with intern, sort of, that, but I don't know how old he is. But we're only sort of talking about what we've heard, gossip wise about Sean Combs and his health status, because this guy, the John Doe in this case, is saying that he contracted HIV at a Puff P. Diddy, Sean Combs, a party, and that now he is suing Sean Combs for sexual battery and sexual assault, and more. I'm assuming it's under the negligence because that's the only way that it could be, that it won't be thrown out. That he's assuming that he's accusing Sean Combs of negligence. So it is a quick reference to the fact that Sean Combs, on the blogs, on the gossip meals, allegedly, people allege that he has this disease. And especially as these lawsuits have sort of popped up, people have said that they have no proof. We don't have any proof, and we are not saying that he has it at all. But that's what people allege. And I want everybody also to be very careful about alleging these kinds of, actions or, kinds of diseases, or talking about this in the way in which you talk about it, because obviously this is a very serious, disease. It's a very serious STD. It's no longer as fatal as it used to be, but people are still dying of HIV/AIDS related health conditions. But I want everyone to be very cognizant of the fact that you cannot go around accusing people or falsely alleging that people have these kinds of diseases without some real ironclad proof. And that is exactly what this guy is going to need in this lawsuit. Okay. All right, guys, that's going to be it for Casting Court TV for today, this Saturday, October 4th, 2025. Please make sure you subscribe and like. We will be keeping up with all the happenings and all the goings ons with the Sean Combs appeal court process as it relates to the sentencing. We will be keeping up with all the civil suits and all of that. So make sure you keep it locked here with Casting Court TV for the latest and greatest on sometimes hated updates going on around the country of the most high profile cases happening. All right, guys, we'll see you later. Have a great rest of your Saturday, and we'll see you soon. Peace, guys.